What is going on, guys? I am Amazing. Welcome back to another video on the channel. There are a total of 45 loading screens in Call of Duty Zombies. That's disregarding Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War because that game doesn't have loading screens. So there are more maps than this, but not every Zombies map has a loading screen, which is crazy to think about how many Zombies maps, and I'm just talking about from Treyarch alone, we have gotten. Never mind Sledgehammer and Infinity Ward. But because there are so many that have released over the years since 2008, as you would imagine, there are loads of hidden details within our loading screens that some of you may have missed. If you've got a keen eye or for a long-time Zombies fan, then perhaps you've looked at every little detail in these loading screens, but more than likely, most of you, including me, haven't. And some of them are, well, let's take a look. Starting from the very beginning, Nectarine Toten, going through every single loading screen until our very latest one, the Archon. The loading screen for our very first ever Zombies map, Nectarine Totem, which released back in 2008, is super interesting because there are still things on here that we don't quite understand. There are things that haven't been properly explained to us by Treyarch still to this day. So for a lot of stuff on here, we can only theorise. We've got a bunch of dates, 1943, 1955 and 1964. For the year 1943, quite a few events happened during that date. The year 1959 revolved around experiments that the Pentagon were doing. The Canorium tells us on June the 3rd on this date, the Pentagon constructed their own prototype teleporter where they commenced experimentation. And the date 1964, even though it's not mentioned in the Canorium, on the map Alpha and Omega, a couple of important things happen around this time, including Peter McCain's re-emergence back into the zombie storyline. It was Purnell and Dr. Hale who brought Peter McCain back to life. They were a part of Broken Arrow. And as for the date 1943, like I said, there are many different events that took place, but a lot of it revolved around the resurrection of the undead. The experiments that Group 935 did in Kino der Toten, Dr. Maxis, Subject 6-2, that was also when Primus arrived in Dimension 63. But taking into consideration the events that took place on these dates, we can only really speculate. We see people down the bottom looking at these screens aimlessly, like they're being brainwashed or mind controlled. We have people walking in a line, someone standing under a light. Could that be Peter McCain representing his revival? But what it does seem this whole loading screen is revolving around is the creation of the undead, whether it be the resurrection of people turning into zombies or the resurrection of Peter McCain. For me, this is still one of the most unexplained loading screens we've ever gotten. We can put out theories as to what's going on here, but we don't truly know, but it seems to have something to do with mind control, the undead and Broken Arrow. The Varuk loading screen pretty much explains itself, a very simple one, just a layout of the map. It shows our perk machines, the electric trap, the power, all stuff which at that time was new to zombies. Shino Numa's loading screen is also self-explanatory. We see the layout of our map, our four characters, Richtofen, Takio, Nikolai and Dempsey, which was the first time we ever saw them on Shino Numa. This is when they were introduced, and the zipline up the top left. There's no hidden details on this. Quite similar with the Derice loading screen. This one's actually for the Giant, but the two are very similar with slight differences. On this one, which is for the Giant, the eye, which you see up the top right, originally was a bolt, and there wasn't this severed finger, but apart from that, they're pretty much the same. It tells us we must link the teleporter to the mainframe, which is how we activate the Pack-a-Punch. I'd be interested to know why exactly Treyarch made the two changes of placing an eyeball and a finger on here, compared to the original where they didn't exist, because they're the only two changes, and it doesn't seem to have any implication on the storyline. Perhaps just for more gore effect, but that is weird, I have to admit. For Kino der Toten's loading screen, it shows the zombie storyline up until this point. We start off with Nectarine Toten, then we go to Varuk, then Shino Numa, and then finally our characters arrive at Derice and then teleport forward in time to Kino in the 60s. The only question on here that people have asked before is, well, who was the bald character we see in Shino Numa? Because none of our Ultimus crew, Richtofen, Takio, Nikolai and Dempsey, are bald. More than likely this is Tank Dempsey. If you take a look at him in the teleporter in Derice, they're wearing the exact same clothing, although it does look like this version of him has hair, so why he looks bald just above, I'm not sure. Dempsey does have short hair, so perhaps it's just that short that you can't see it. There were also theories that this is Peter McCain and another bald character in our zombie story, Dr. Gersh. That's definitely not him, but more than likely this is Dempsey. For some reason though, he just looks bald. 5's loading screen is pretty self-explanatory, there's nothing to hide here. It's all 5 characters, JFK, Nixon, Castro and McNamara. On Ascension's loading screen, there are a few secrets that Treyarch hid. First being the 3 rockets that we see, creating the numbers 115 in their shadow, a reference to Element 115, the element that creates the undead. And then we have a mysterious character both on the left and on the right, who is Yuri Savosky, or the Pentagon Thief. we see him what I assume to be working on rocket research, which was sending monkeys into outer space via these rockets. He got transferred to this program by Dr. Gersh after he was taken off that project, which was creating the Gersh device. Because he was acting crazy, Gersh didn't trust him. We know Yuri started to turn crazy after he read Richtofen's diary. When he did that, he began to hear voices of the ether in his head. That voice that he heard was Samantha Maxey's. Samantha manipulated Yuri, told him to do things, hence why he started acting crazy. But anyway, eventually, obeying Samantha's orders, he completed the Gersh device on his own, activated it, which sucked in Dr. Gersh, and then he eventually entered the Gersh device and travelled to the Pentagon 5. And that's probably what we're seeing happen on the right. Yuri entering the Gersh device and teleporting to the Pentagon. But it could also be him turning into the Pentagon thief. That could be showing his transformation. Call of the Dead's loading screen is a simple one, and what Treyarch started to do at this point was tear off pages of our loading screen so we could see on the left side that is the previous map, Ascension, and then on the right side underneath we see our next zombies map, which was Shangri-La. But this one just shows George and our Call of the Dead cast fighting off against the undead. The next zombies map was Shangri-La, arguably the most inspected loading screen of all time. We've got the Himalayas, which is where Shangri-La is located, the black sun logo in the forest or bushes, whatever they are, the greenery, a freak atmospheric event being the tornado and the lightning with the temples getting sucked through, an eclipse. There is so much going on here that would make for its own 10-minute separate video. I've talked about this so many times before about what's going on in this loading screen, and to be fair, we still don't 100% know. Everything you know about this loading screen, everything you hear from whoever it is just a theory. But this symbol on the ground, the black sun logo, was meant to represent the Vril, or in other words, the Keepers. This atmospheric event that we see going on was mentioned in the zombie storyline. It was this that caused Brock and Gary's plane to crash. However, that was in an alternate timeline. The mountains that you see in the background don't look like they're from Earth, and that's because Shangri-La actually takes place on Mars, but only sometimes. During the Shangri-La Easter egg, when the eclipse is happening, that is when Shangri-La is teleported through time and space to Mars. Again, I've done a full video on that. If you want to check it out, I will leave the link to it down in the description. That should convince you guys that Shangri-La is 100% on Mars when the eclipse is taking place. When it's not, that's when it's on Earth, which could explain some of the events that we see on the loading screen. This atmospheric event doesn't look like something we'd see take place on Earth. Yes, we get tornadoes, we get lightning, but nothing as crazy as this. And we see the temples getting ripped from the ground and sucked into this tornado, and if we go to our next loading screen, which is Moon, flying in the background, we see some kind of pyramid just floating in outer space. The Moon loading screen shows tons of different things. There is this shadow cast over the moon of Samantha holding her teddy bear, possibly representing her being on the moon instead of the MPD pyramid. Below that, we see astronauts walking away from us. That pyramid can still be seen floating in the background, but there is also one on the moon as well, and the only pyramid that we know on Moon is the MPD, the Moon Pyramid device, and it looks nothing like this stone contraption that we see in the loading screen. This isn't the MPD pyramid that we know of on the moon. So what exactly this pyramid is, we don't know. It looks like the one we see in the background floating is the exact same, but there has always been the question, is that perhaps one of these Shangri-La pyramids that we see getting sucked up through the tornado? Is this one of those that got thrown up into outer space? There's also an image of the excavator, and on the left there's loads of different advertisements, loads of different things you can buy from this newspaper: an idol, a vending machine bank for $3.50, gamma ray spectacles, the thunder gun, speed cola, a director's chair from Call of the Dead, a balloon, gun mule, which of course is mule kick, the pack-a-punch, the surprise monkey or the monkey bomb, a Nova 6 tank, just loads of different references to things we've seen in zombies. We then move on to Black Ops 2's loading screens, starting with Transit, which show us what the map would have looked like in its prime, when it was active back in the 50s and 60s. When we played Transit, it is in the year 2025 in a post-apocalyptic zombified wasteland, but here we see Transit before that. And what's interesting is on the first image in the bus depot, we see the bus, people standing there, but behind that looks to be fire. Is this showing the moments just before Transit was turned to dust? Is this the moment that the 3 rockets hit Earth and left it fractured and broken? Is this the moment that the rocket struck Transit and this fire is a result of that, just before it destroys the place? Town also looks really cool. I love the 50s and 60s vibe. It's interesting to see how these places looked previous. It's the same with Farm and Diner. Newtown's loading screen is even more mysterious because we see, well, a few things: a crater, a drill, and then multiple people standing around it, along with somebody operating. Now, as a part of the Call of Duty Zombies comics, within them we got some brand new loading screens that showed us alternates to this one along with others. We'll see them later on, but because of that we know this person right here is Schuster, but that was as much as we were ever told. This, just like a few other loading screens, has never been fully explained to us. Who are these people? Why are they drilling? Where exactly is this? And what is this big dome circular device? We've never seen anything like this in Zombies, besides from this one cipher, which may or may not link to this. It could be found in Gorod Karovi, and it read, "Finally, the lab is almost complete. Security measures are being put in place so that the chance of detection by the Americans is very unlikely. We also have several agents embedded with the staff as insurance. We will keep the individuals in stasis, on ours to speak, and continue the specimen rotation once we finish drawing more power from the drill." Oh, I forgot. The sequence for the current blood samples is as follows: SSMJ ABR. Those are the initials of our transit characters: Samuel Strulinger, Malton Johnson, Abigail Brighton and Russman. The cipher talks a lot about Mob of the Dead and the lab that we see there under Alcatraz, but it randomly just mentions drawing power from a drill. We have never seen anything in Call of Duty Zombies that relates to drawing power from a drill besides from this loading screen. But from what we know, this loading screen has no relation to Mob of the Dead. It was Richtofen who built the lab. We do know that Dr. Schuster had a relationship with Richtofen, not a sexual one. But if that's not the reason, then we don't know what's going on here. In the Die Rise loading screen, we see the transit characters, or should I say the Victor's crew, arriving in Die Rise in China, Province 22, after being teleported here from Green Run by Richtofen, and in the bottom left we see the Earth fractured and broken. Mob of the Dead's loading screen has a bunch of information. A lot of it isn't really hidden detail, it's just to do with the map, such as the afterlife, the building of the plane. There is also this, which is a Hill cipher. When decoded, it says, "While I realise that the current lack of cooperation from Chicago's finest leaves us at something of a disadvantage, I find your latest report extremely troubling. The alliance that exists between us and the Northside gangs must be sustained, lest we face a repeat of February 19th, 1929. And the ADFGX cipher here says, "Urgent, the giant is in France." In the berry loaded screen in these boxes, the first one in the top left, we see the witch, or Jebediah Brown's mother. Jebediah Brown was a blacksmith that used to work in the Old West, in this old mining town. It wasn't in this exact location at that time. We know it was teleported to Africa due to temporal rifts, but this woman here was Jebediah's mother. She was unfortunately killed by the undead, and when she died, her son Jeb placed her inside of the Pack-a-Punch machine, thinking it would bring her back to life, but it didn't, and instead she returned as this witch that would continue to haunt the house that we see right here. And then in the other images we see Victus fighting against the zombies. And there were also two other kind of alternate loading screens that we got for Buried, for the grief mode and the turn mode, but nothing really interesting on them. And the exact same thing can be said for Origins loading screen, which was a cool artistic look of the map. And that was kind of how COD Zombies loading screens went from here on. Shadows of Evil was our characters, Jack, Jessica, Floyd and Nero, and then behind them the Shadow Man. The Reisendrackers was a picture of the castle with the rockets in the mountains that we send to destroy the moon. Zetsubos was a mixture of our characters and loads of elements from the map. I loved the style of the Gorod Karovi loading screen, which looks like it was painted. And Revelations was really weird, because the style that Trark went for was almost like loads of different comic pages ripped apart and then glued together. There is the Victor's crew, Monty's house, Monty himself, an Elder God, the Shadow Man, the Summoning Key. I always thought this part in particular was weird. It looks like the islands that we see in Revelations, but on this one, there is a green light illuminating from it. That might be something, it might be nothing. I've never really seen anyone speak about it. It could just be my eyes deceiving me. And there's also the Apothecan Sun. As a part of the Call of Duty Zombies comics, we got 7 brand new alternate loading screens that we'd never seen before. You can't access these through game, they're not on Treyarch's website or anything unless you buy the comics digitally. You can only see these if you purchase the physical comics. The first new loading screen that we were given was an alternate of Nectarine Toten, where multiple changes have been made, whereas on the original it was just one person entering through this teleporter. This time it's multiple characters, and it's very noticeable that it's the Primus crew. You can see Nikolai's hat. Down the bottom here, these pods have been replaced with those people that were sitting in front of the screens becoming brainwashed. These are the same pods that Dempsey was captured in Der Eisendrache. Who was in these, we can't see. It could be Richtofen, Takeo, Nikolai and Dempsey. They could also be for these people getting brainwashed and turned into the undead. They could also be for Victor's crew. And I say that because this person here has now been changed to someone with a baton, who was the only character in Zombies that we know would have one of these, the Warden. Or Stanley Ferguson. Alcatraz prison is in the background as these people are walking through. We now have the dates 1941, 1933 and 1914. The only thing that we know took place on 1914 was when Richtofen visited an alternate version of himself to hand him the blood vials and origins. 1933 revolved around Mob of the Dead. It was the date that Stanley Ferguson began working at Alcatraz, but it was also the year that the Mob of the Dead characters died. Al was killed by Sal, Finn and Billy, and then they were sentenced to death by electric chair. And 1941 revolved around the laboratory in Alcatraz. It was when the lab was complete. It was when Victus met with Richtofen to hand him the canorium, and it was when Primus arrived to collect the Victus blood samples, which potentially is what we are seeing here. So this whole loading screen revolves around Alcatraz. There is the warden on the left, what I would guess is prisoners, maybe somewhere within them is Finn, Al, Sal and Billy. A character standing in the prison, could that be the warden, could that be Stanley Ferguson, checking on the inmates. Also there, we see the pods under the cells. Who is in these pods, we don't know, because these aren't the same ones that Victus are kept in. And then we see Primus entering the lab in Alcatraz. The next loading screen is for a multitude of different maps, mainly the Giant. When Richtofen stepped out of the teleporter and shot himself, we know that was the point in which everything changed. Richtofen killing himself changed the future and the past, causing temporal rifts. Peter McCain is no longer hanging in Shinonuma, Verrucht is no longer infected by the undead, it's a normal mental asylum, and the plane in Nectarine Toten never crashes, meaning the zombie outbreak never happens. This is showing a world and our maps where the zombies don't exist. The next comic book loading screen we got was a new one for Mob of the Dead. The left side is the same, but on the right side, a page has been torn off, and under it we have the blood vials, Richtofen either handing another version of himself blood vials, or that's him coming face to face with his younger self, Eddie. It also shows again Richtofen entering the portal into the Alcatraz lab. And then underneath we have a separate newspaper. We can't read all of it, it's cut off, but from what we can make out it says zombie something Parliament gathering for emergency meeting. And in Der Reisendrache there is an Easter egg which basically tells us of an undead outbreak in London. Now that event, even though it wasn't a zombies map, may very well have happened. There was an undead outbreak in London, and that would have made for a cool zombies map, we just never got it. In Ascension's alternate loading screen, Dr. Monty is rewriting history. He's changing the blueprints. On this new one he draws a dragon. The rockets, which showed the numbers 115 in their shadow, is no longer there. And Yuri is nowhere to be seen. Instead, we have a keeper. Oh, and Samantha inside of a gobblegum machine. Why we have a keeper, we don't know. Why Samantha has been shown drawn inside of the gobblegum machine, we don't have answers to. I wish we did. We do know that these are alternate loading screens for alternate universes, alternate scenarios, things that Dr. Monty has changed in the timeline, but they're not explained, and for ones like this, we just don't have answers. On the new moon one, a few things are different. The pyramid is still there, it's still floating in the back, but we don't have Samantha's shadow being cast over the moon. Instead, it's here now, where she is now in Shangri-La, and the other big difference is the astronauts are now walking towards us instead of away, and a lot of the advertisements that were on the left have also changed. Some are still the same and some have gone, but they don't really mean anything. This was where we got a better look at Newtown, a more zoomed out version compared to the original. This showed us that this character was Dr. Schuster. You can see his nameplate. Above the drill reveals the big dome and some characters watching. That's as far as we were ever told. The thing with this is these loading screens are quite old now, and because the Ether story is over, it's not going to be advanced on. I don't think for stuff like this we're ever going to get a true explanation for. We can theorize what they're drilling for. What even is this dome? It looks like there are bubbles surrounding it, which would suggest that this is underwater, but looking at the sky and the mountains, that would also suggest that this is above ground. And on the final new comic loading screen, it showed us the Primus and Victus characters arriving at Dr. Monty's house. Now, since these comic book loading screens are in an alternate timeline, what we know actually happened is Richtofen and the crew, at the end of Revelations, were tricked by Dr. Monty into repeating the cycle. But what we're seeing here is Richtofen, Tachynickel and Dempsey, both Primus and Ultimus, arriving at his house. So in this alternate timeline, potentially they figured out that Dr. Monty was lying and travelled to the house to kill him. And what it also shows us is that Dr. Monty's house is located in England. I think the real life location of it is it Herefordshire? I can't remember, but it shows Tachynickel and Dempsey teleporting from Stalingrad, Russia to England, where Monty's house is. And then we move on to Black Ops 4, where once again the loading screens went back to this art style where they weren't cryptic. So this was Blood of the Dead's. I actually have this as a poster, I think it's really cool. Classified, where we had Samantha, one of her eyes being the moon, the other one lit up representing the sun, but also her as a zombie, and then the MPD pyramid in the middle. The 9 loading screen with our characters Scarlet, Diego, Bruno and Shaw. Voyage of the Dead on the Titanic. Dead of the Night. Let's move on. Ancient Evil, there's nothing we can get from this. Alpha Omega, which is Newtown, we have our Primus and Ultimus characters, the zombies, the nuclear explosion, and the final BO4 zombies map, Nectar Toten, showing either two things. One, this is Siberia with the sun rising in the background, or we know in tag there is an Easter egg that reveals to you that Nectar Toten is on one of Mars's moons, being Phobos, and the planet we see in front of us is Mars. It does look like it's irradiating a lot more than what Mars is in the game, which makes me think that this is the sun, but is there the chance that this is actually Mars? Again, check out that Shangri-La video, link in the description, which will tell you more on this. For Cold War, we didn't really have any proper loading screens, they were just transitions like this of the map, but strangely for Vanguard we actually did. Although there wasn't a lot to them, we did get original style loading screens. This was Duran Fangs, showing us a layout of the map, the perk, Von List's table with a bunch of artifacts on here. This was Terra Maledicta's loading screen. It says, escape Stalingrad, out of the deep freeze into the sandstorm. The Royal Court of Cortifex? What is the construct? Must separate Von List from Cortifex. This loading screen shows us 4 different clans or races that were a part of Cortifex's army. There's one here, one here, one here, and interestingly, the 4th race is blackened out. This part's removed. The 2 tribes or races that you see on the left belong to the entities who we know as Nauticus and Volcana. The one on the right is Bellicars, but this one that's been removed, we don't know. If you look closely, it looks like they've got tentacles, but as of now, that's a mystery. And then this was Shino Numer Reborn's loading screen, nothing here. And then finally the Archons, which, although it looks awesome, there's no hidden details, messages, there's nothing we can take away. But that is every single loading screen within Call of Duty Zombies from Treyarch. Some interesting ones, some simple ones. It's clear to see where Treyarch perhaps moved away from these or didn't care as much during Black Ops Cold War, since we didn't have them. We were just shown transitions of the maps whilst we were loading in. But apart from that, even Vanguard, we did get some. And they do, or did, especially in the beginning, hold a lot of meaning and secret. So there we go. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video today. If you have, drop a like rating and let me know your thoughts about these in the comment section below, and also tell me which of these loading screens is your favorite. Which one do you think is the best out of the bunch? You can also check out my YouTube course, which you will find in the description. Make sure you are subscribed. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.